Hello, everybody, and welcome to Analytics Simplified. I welcome you all with a new series of lectures. In this series, we will be talking about the different data fallacies that any data analyst should avoid. So, the first fallacy that we will be talking about in this session is cherry picking. So when we talk about cherry picking, first try to understand what it is. So it is a logical fallacy where we are selecting the data points that support our hypothesis in contrast to the points that do not support our hypothesis. So basically what happens is a research scientist or a research scholar is there or any data analyst is there, and what he's doing is he is trying to gather some data points and he's trying to figure out if a particular hypothesis is correct or not. So in this process, chances are more that the person is going to choose data points which support the hypothesis as against the points that do not support the hypothesis, right? So this is exactly what is called as cherry picking, because we are cherry picking the points that are supporting the hypothesis at the expense of the points that reject the proposition. Okay, so irrespective of the extent to which it takes place, it always creates a false impression, and it always leads to, it all basically misleads the audience. So now that we have understood what cherry picking is all about, let us also try to understand why it happens in the first place. So the primary reason why it happens for the first place is that in today's world, successful theories are given more impetus, and the research works which report null hypotheses are not submitted or published anywhere. So naturally, only the success stories are being covered or appreciated. So there is always this tendency among the researchers and data analysts to come up with something that they can show off as a successful event. So in this particular process, what they do is they create a hypothesis, and in an urge to publish that particular hypothesis or to get appreciated, they end up selecting the data points that support the hypothesis, and in this process, they simply leave the data points that are not supporting the hypothesis aside. So in this way, they try to show off as if they have come up with something credible. Now, one thing that we have to understand is we do not have to be very much rude to this particular topic, because as far as cherry picking is concerned, it can be intentional and it can also be unintentional. So we will be talking about both the facts one by one. So first of all, let us try to understand what is going to happen if the cherry picking is intentional. So if the cherry picking is intentional, it basically violates the principle of total evidence. So what is this principle? The principle of total evidence basically says that whenever you have to establish a hypothesis, you have to thoroughly check the hypothesis against the evidence which is available, right? But in this case, you can easily see that as a consequence of cherry picking, we are only considering the points that are supporting the hypothesis. So, and we are not taking the entire picture into consideration, and that is why this cherry picking itself violates the principle of total evidence, right? So when naturally when you are showing only one side of the coin, so the arguments become more persuasive, but still they are incorrect arguments. In most of the cases, cherry picking is unintentional. The reason being is that we are all human beings, and human beings naturally fall prey to something which is called as confirmation bias. So, simply put, confirmation bias is a tendency of human beings to look for points that support their mental thought process. So naturally, when confronted with a situation or when required to collect evidence, a human being is more likely to collect the evidences that support his or her thought process as compared to the evidences that do not support the thought process. So because of this, in most of the cases, unintentional cherry picking can also be there in the course of experiments. On the other hand, cherry picking is a bit easier. Why is it so? Because when you have to collect all the data points, an exhaustive study has to be conducted. In contrast to this exhaustive study, cherry picking is always an easier option. And naturally, human beings have a tendency to go for the processes that are simpler. So, because of these two factors, confirmation bias and easy course of action, cherry picking in most of the cases occurs unintentionally. So why is it a problem? It is a problem because it is not showing you the complete picture. It is only showing you one side of the coin. Okay. And in most of the cases, it leads to generalizations that are utterly incorrect, because these generalizations or these conclusions have been come up by looking at only select few data points. Okay, and irrespective of whether it is intentional or unintentional, cherry picking, if present in a course of experiment, always undermines the research outcome. So let us try to appreciate like what are the steps that can be taken in order to avoid cherry picking. So the first step that you can go for is to increase the sample size. So whenever you are going to increase the sample size, you will be having more number of data points to test your hypothesis against, and chances are more likely that now whatever conclusion or whatever outcomes are obtained, they are much more reliable. Likewise, another way you can avoid cherry picking is to go for double blind experiments. So this is primarily a case in experiments in human psychology or sociology. So double blind experiments are the experiments in which the experimenter and the subjects on which the experiments have to be conducted, they are not aware of one another. Okay, because just because experimenter is aware of the subjects can lead to some sort of bias. So when double blind experiments are conducted, chances are more likely that whatever outcome comes, that is more trustworthy, because now there is no confirmation bias present either in the subjects or in the person who is conducting the experiments. And also when writing a research or communicating the result in the form of a story, words have to be chosen carefully so that they only communicate the research findings, because sometimes what happens is that inappropriate words are chosen, and those inappropriate words are more likely to exaggerate the findings. So this should again not be done. We have to be very careful when while reporting the research outcomes to make sure that no exaggeration is being told. Now, we will also talk about how to respond to cherry picking. Let's say you have understood that okay, in this course of experiments, cherry picking has been there, either intentional or unintentional. So how to respond to these events? So there are two ways to respond to cherry picking. First of all, there is a passive approach and there is a active approach. So in the passive approach, what we do, we simply call it out that okay, there is some sort of cherry picking that has taken place, as some data points have been left out, and those data points could have provided some crucial information. So passive approach, this is a passive approach. You simply call it out that there is some missing information that needs to be filled. Okay. But active is a more professional way to go about responding to an event of cherry picking. So in the active approach, what we do is we bring in the missing information and also justify our move. So not only call it out and point that some information is being left out, but we proactively bring those missing points into the experiments. So how to respond to cherry picking? There are some factors, or there are some tenets that have to be followed. First of all, we have to observe the principle of charity. So what is this principle of charity? Principle of charity basically says that even if you find out that some amount of cherry picking has taken place, you have to assume that that particular cherry picking is unintentional, that there was no foul play. It was just because of confirmation bias or the human tendencies that this has actually taken place. So you do not have to be suspicious about the intent of the researcher or analyst. You simply have to believe that it somehow must have come in unintentionally. So that is the principle of charity. So there is no need to confront the researcher. You can simply talk to the person and explain your point. Okay, by assuming that even if there is cherry picking, that is more likely an unintentional process. And then in some cases, what you can do is you can also ask the researcher or the data analyst to justify their choice of omitting the information that you think is crucial. So in that case, it's a more open-ended question, and a good amount of discussion can take place. And consequently, you may come up with whether or not those points that you think crucial were actually crucial or not. So in this way, it's a more professional and a more healthy way to engage in case you find out that there is some sort of cherry picking going on. So what research community thinks about cherry picking? So I must say on paper it is discouraged, yet it is popular in the research community. In most of the cases it is unintentional, but in some cases it can also be intentional. And irrespective of what it is, it always has the potential to undermine the credibility of the work done. So these are some case studies that pertain to cherry picking. We already know that on the social media or In the television also, the information that is being shown to you has been cherry picked. You are not being shown all the information, you are not being given all the details. Only the details that meet a specific agenda are being shown to you by the respective content creators. Likewise, when we talk about politics, politics is something that does not remain untouched from cherry picking, right? So in politics also, politicians are showing you one side of the picture, and they're purposefully not giving you the complete overview of the process. Likewise, some allegations have been made, like in context to COVID-19 crisis also, some amount of cherry picking has taken place. I'm not saying this, it's an allegation that has been reported multiple times. So, and primarily it was the case with the COVID vaccine companies. So, it was alleged that those companies have conducted COVID-19 test and they have not given the complete data, complete experimental data, and the data that they have published conforms to the utility of their vaccines. Because they are not giving the complete data, so there are some specific caveats to be taken. So with this, we now come to the end of this session. I hope you have learned something new about cherry picking, why is it so rampant, how to respond to an event of cherry picking, and what are the different use case scenarios in which you can possibly expect cherry picking to be there. With this, we come to the end of this session. Feel free to share this among your friends.